I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Montgomery County is about to pass a Safe Streets bill in pursuit of its avowed Vision Zero agenda. Vision Zero is a worldwide initiative to make roads safer for non-motorists and was adopted by the county as a demonstration of its intention to improve road safety. In politics, road safety is like apple pie and kissing babies. Everyone is for it. Politicians demand it. They tell you continually how important it is, how even one death is one too many. The public loves the idea of it and votes for politicians who talk about road safety. Until things need to be done. Lowering speeds, for example. And these steps begin to inconvenience us. Our annoyance at slower speeds when we are driving trumps our dread of death when we are walking on the same roads. We walk less and less and buy bigger and bigger automobiles. While it has become safer to be inside our cars, being outside of them remains a dangerous choice. And it is, for many, not a choice at all if they cannot afford a car. Distracted drivers looking at their phones have added exponentially to road risks. Traffic deaths and collisions are up. We need to change infrastructure and institutions, culture and technology and engineering standards. We need to change budgets and personnel. We need a social transformation. To find out how much the Safe Streets Bill, offered as a comprehensive road safety bill, actually does bring social transformation, I talked to pedestrian and bicycle activist Miriam Schonbaum, who has followed road safety in Montgomery County longer than anyone else I know. Full disclosure, Miriam and I sit on the board of a local advocacy group, Action Committee for Transit.
I hope there's a good song on when I die, something with a melody that I can softly sigh, a minuet, a rhapsody, or a sweet lullaby. I hope there's a good song on when I die. I hope there's a good song on when I pass through the gates of heaven with a big brass band, trumpets, horns, and tubas.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the band Finster, which was first formed in State College, Pennsylvania in the 1990s. And they came back together after 25 years for their second album, Crosswinds, which they released on the podcast earlier in January this year. Kate Servino-Johnson on vocals and guitar, Doogie Whitaker on guitar and vocals, Howard Rayback on the bass, and Matt Zielenz on the drums.
When my friend the reaper in the evening comes to take me home, I'll walk beside him and sing all the songs I've got to know, that I have learned well on this earth, and he is sure to grin. My friend the reaper will harmonize while I sing. I hope there's a good song on when I go. Let's finish off this inning and head off to the show.
In the news this week, in the largely democratic politics of Washington, D.C., specifically of the District of Columbia as opposed to the national capital, the D.C. Council passed a Get Tough on Crime bill. I'll get to the bill's details in just a minute, but what is remarkable about the bill is that it passed 12-1 after a year-long debate where it seemed that the majority of the council was in fact opposed to provisions like the one found in the new law. As Tom Sherwood, the longtime reporter of DC politics and Kojo Namdi's show commentator, tweeted, "Growing public pressure in the face of violent crime can do things." Violent crime and homicides in DC have continued to grow in 2023, even as other major metropolitan areas and neighboring jurisdictions are coming down from the highs of the immediate post-pandemic years. Every year, there is also a seasonal rise in crime in the summer months, and DC's bill wants to have some immediate and visible impact. The most controversial of which is new authority for judges to hold pre-trial suspects in detention in case of violent crimes or if the suspect has a history of violent crimes. Even more controversially, this applies to adults and juveniles. The bill also allows the use of ankle bracelet GPS data as evidence in court, makes a new offense for firing a weapon in public, and expands government subsidies available for businesses installing security cameras. The DC Council and the city's mayor have disagreed on what to do about crime. The majority of the council has wanted a more comprehensive approach to crime, including, and importantly, police reform. But Mayor Bowser has pushed for tough measures and empowering police and prosecutors to bring down the crime rate quickly. The expansion of pre-trial detention of adults and juveniles is noteworthy for going against the main thrust of police and criminal justice reform since the protests following the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. The only no vote was from council member Janice Lewis George, who said, "We are doing the same thing we were doing in 1994. We have books on this. We have scholarly articles on this. It's the same reaction. We cannot make the same mistake. This is how mass incarceration happens bit by bit." Crime is notoriously hard to bring down. Police action cleans up one area only for crime to move to another area, which has become under-policed as a consequence of the police bringing focus to the first area itself. There is the further problem of perception and reality. Even though crime rates have fallen overall in Montgomery County and other neighboring jurisdictions around Washington, D.C., that is not often the public impression. And county-wide measures will often mask the clustering of crime in certain specific locations. For example, the crime rate in up-county Montgomery County is higher than the crime rate for down county, including Silver Spring, which is often associated with high crime. But overall, the crime rate in the county is down. Summer may yet prove to be challenging, but historically, the summer months see an uptick. What are the likely effects of DC's new law on the rest of the region? First, if DC is successful in its crackdown, expect crime to diffuse out into neighboring jurisdictions. Second, it is possible that governments, prosecutors, and the police in these jurisdictions will seek similar new authorities if crime does in fact spike. Third, police reform groups are watching this closely and are beginning to organize against this expansion of police. I'll be back with bicycle and pedestrian safety advocate Miriam Schonbaum.
Still the boy who stole my heart back in the day, back at the start. I don't want a new story to tell. I just want to repeat the one where I fell in love with you. My heart's so
Miriam Schonbaum, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you.
It's been 2 years.
How time flies.
The Montgomery County Council is considering a Safe Streets Act. Can you give us a brief overview on what this new law is about?
At a very high level, it's about making safer streets for non-motorists and motorists alike in the county in three different ways. The first is adjusting the operation of county-controlled traffic signals in certain limited parts of the county to ban right turn on red and give pedestrians a jump time to get into the intersection before the drivers have a green. The second part is requiring the county executive to come up with a plan for automated enforcement. So that would mean red light cameras, speed cameras, and stop sign cameras. And the third part is doing an infrastructure review for certain school-related crashes on county-controlled roads.
If they were to do these, what kind of impact do you expect to see?
Well, in the bigger picture, turning drivers are a huge hazard for pedestrians. Drivers turning right on red, drivers turning right on green, and drivers turning left on green. And so it is routine to see in the crash reports where pedestrians were hit and even seriously injured while crossing in the marked crosswalk at an intersection with a walk signal, and the driver was turning.
Okay. Do we know that of the pedestrians hit, how many were hit on the red light as vehicles are turning right?
So this is information that you cannot necessarily determine from the crash report. There are not fields to indicate that. You have to figure it out from the context. But it happens often enough that it's a routine occurrence. And so really the numbers, I think, are irrelevant. This is a known hazard. Basically every time when you're driving and you see a sign up on the signal mast arm that says drivers yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk, that's an indication that a turning driver hit somebody right there in the crosswalk, and somebody said, hey, you got to do something. And they said, okay, we'll put up a sign.
But still, when we make public policy, we want to get the biggest bang for the buck, if you will.
This is not a lot of bucks. It's putting up a no right on red sign and reprogramming a traffic signal.
This is only for county roads, right? This is not for state highway, state roads, or municipal roads. So within the city of Rockville, or Tacoma Park, or whatever.
So this is only for county-controlled intersections, so that every road involved in the intersection is a county road, and there is a traffic signal, and it is in certain limited areas, which I think are still under discussion, but the scope has been expanded from the bill as introduced originally.
Do you have a couple of good examples of where this would happen?
For Germantown, one example of a county-controlled intersection would be Middlebrook Road and Century Boulevard.
Okay. What about someplace in downtown Silver Spring?
I'm sure that is also included.
Those are included, right?
To the extent that it is a county-controlled signalized intersection.
Okay. But none of the Georgia Avenue intersections are covered because Georgia Avenue itself is a state road.
Right. And if there is a state road involved, then the state controls the intersection. In the big picture, we know, and we have known since, the late 1970s, that right turn on red is very dangerous for pedestrians and bicyclists. That's the big picture. And then, as translated to the Safe Streets Act, it would limit right turn on red at a small number of county-controlled intersections in Montgomery County.
Is there a numerical number of how many intersections we're talking about?
I assume that MCDOT has that number. This is certainly a positive step forward. It is also a very small step forward. Could we have done more? This goes back to a political science class I took in graduate school, where the professor said a policy that is not politically feasible is not a policy, it's just an idea.
Are you saying that because you don't think more is politically feasible?
I think it's always a question how much more is politically feasible. There's the political leadership. There is a lot of bureaucratic inertia. Even if the county council passes legislation and the county executive implements it, getting the bureaucracy to do what you want them to do is a whole nother issue.
The second part of the bill requires the county executive to come up with a traffic enforcement camera plan, right?
Yes.
How important is that in your view?
Well, there are two aspects to this. The first is enforcement, and I think there is a general sense, in the county, in the state, and nationally, that there is just an awful lot of lawless, dangerous driving out there. That's something someone ought to do something about. And then we get to the question, what should be done about it? And automated enforcement is certainly a possibility. Some of the automated enforcement, however, would require enabling legislation from the Maryland General Assembly. I know there was a bill to allow automated enforcement for stop signs in Maryland, which they have in DC, but the bill failed. So it seems to me that one aspect of including this in the bill is to be prepared with a plan for when the enabling legislation at the state level does pass.
Right. And so also to build a political momentum for camera traffic enforcement in the General Assembly by sort of gently nudging the issue forward.
Well, I think it would go both ways, that the county plan signals to the state legislature that we're ready to go. And then when the state legislature passes the bill, we would be ready to go.
Now, Councilmember Will Jawando has another bill called the STEP Act, which also pushes in the same direction to have more automated enforcement of traffic violation instead of police officers actually stopping, drivers for minor offenses. And instead, sort of in moving in that direction there seems to be a consensus that traffic enforcement is the best way forward, given all that is at stake. Do you find camera-based traffic enforcement problematic? Because, I did an episode on the bus cameras on MCPS, and Delegate David Moon from District 20 has data that shows that a overwhelming number of bus camera tickets are issued in places in his district and wrongly.
Well, so there's automated enforcement, the concept, and then there's automated enforcement, the implementation. And obviously, we would want good implementation and not bad implementation of automated enforcement. And there's also, of course, the issue of enforcing the automated enforcement, as they, again, have discovered in DC, that if you issue 5,000 speeding cameras to the same license plate and nothing ever happens, then it's really it's not enforcement.
The Safe Streets Act now just is pushing the ball into the county executive's court, saying, please come up with a plan. And that's it for now, right?
I believe that's it for now, would be starting with the plan. And then once you have the plan, then you would start to implement the plan.
Okay. Now, the third part of the bill is infrastructure review of school-related collisions. Now, what does the law seek to do there?
The law, as originally introduced, in my understanding of it, would require the county to do infrastructure reviews and post the results of the reviews for crashes involving, and I get lost in the details here. I believe it was for crashes involving pedestrians and bicyclists during arrival or dismissal times in county established school zones on county roads.
So if there is a school that is on a state road, then this does not apply?
Right. As my understanding is, nothing in this bill applies to state roads or municipal roads.
So Blair High School, which is on University Boulevard, no go.
Right, that's a state road. Maybe half of the high schools were on state roads.
Did you also look at middle and elementary schools or just high schools?
There are a lot of schools. There are way too many schools.
There are 207, 208 schools.
Right. And it's not just schools that are on county roads, but it's schools that are on county roads that have an established school zone. So Maryland state law provides for establishing a school zone on a road within a half-mile radius of a school. And it's generally the Department of Transportation that is responsible for that road. So SHA, the State Highway Administration, would establish school zones on state roads, and the county would establish school zones on county roads. In practice, the school zones generally extend basically along the frontage of the road, and that's it. So we're not talking about a half mile, we're talking about 1,000 feet.
But how is that possible? Because there's a law. And so SHA and Montgomery County Department of Transportation are not within the law in establishing a school zone that is half mile in radius, or is there another provision that allows them to do that?
The law allows them to establish the school zone within a radius of up to half a mile. The only thing they have to do, what they have to do is, if they establish a school zone, they have to put up signs.
Okay. So that clarifies things, right? So first of all, they don't have to establish school zones, correct?
They don't have to.
Are there schools that have no school zones?
Yes, there's a large number of schools that don't have school zones. It's a long list.
It's a long list of schools that have no established school zone per law.
No established county school zone.
And I'm not asking you to speak for the Department of Transportation right now, but do you have a sense of why this is the case, that there is no school zone around some of these schools?
Some of my guesses are, they thought it was the road is too small, or nobody asked for one, or, honestly, school zones don't do much. You could put a speed camera in a school zone. for example. But you can double speeding fines in a school zone. But if nobody is pulling people over and writing tickets, school zones don't do much.
Well, now with the traffic enforcement plan, automated traffic enforcement plan, they can then put cameras, if cameras are automatically allowed within school zones, in school zones.
Well, yes, that it all works together. But merely establishing a school zone and putting up the signs does not by itself do much of anything.
Okay.
I doubt that most drivers even notice.
All right. So there's a long list of schools that have no designated school zones. And even in your view, even if they establish a school zone, however big or small it is, within that half-mile radius, it is not effective because school zone traffic violations are not regularly enforced.
Right. That, as I understand it, the purpose of school zones in this bill is merely to delineate the area where the county would have to do infrastructure reviews, and it delineates a very small area.
What should be the true review area?
Ideally, it could be every time anybody under 18 gets hit by a car, which happens a lot. There's no way for us to know how often it happens, but I'm guessing it's, well over 100. I have asked for the data, but I haven't gotten the data.
What is the denominator in the 100 compared to what?
Out of maybe 650.
650?
I think it's probably, it might be 200. I don't know. I haven't gotten the data. It happens a lot. And it happens a lot for kids to get hit. Well, I should say, in the police crash reports, it happens a lot for people to get hit during arrival or dismissal near schools. And from the crash report, it looks like that could have been a student. And sometimes you can find out if you listen, for example, to the scanner data, and sometimes the scanner, the police dispatch says it was a pediatric person. And then you assume, this was near a school and it was during arrival or dismissal, and presumably this was a person going to school.
So you follow road safety very closely. And upon reading a police report of a crash, you cannot definitively determine that a crash involved somebody under 18 years of age.
Right. So there are two issues here. The first issue is that the police crash report does not include information on, what the pedestrian was doing. Were they going to school or whatever? That's one thing. And the other thing is the police crash report does have a field for date of birth of the people involved in the crash, the non-motorist as well as the driver. But this is private information, and it's not released in the weekly data crash updates on Data Montgomery because it's personal information.
Of course. And so
there's no way to know from the crash report data that are public released whether or not it was a child.
Okay. So we don't know that of the 650 collisions that happen in Montgomery County, how many of them involve children. We do not know that.
Well, some of us know that, but I don't know that. The public doesn't know it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. It's not publicly known. Obviously, somebody who's at the crash site knows. What is the implication of that for the infrastructure review as proposed in the Safe Streets Act?
Well, so my understanding is that MCDOT anticipates doing certainly fewer than 10 infrastructure reviews a year.
10 a year. Where did you get that number?
10 a year I got from my own data analysis looking at locations associated with police crash reports in county designated school zones by time of day.
Okay. So within the limitations established by the law, right? And therefore subject to the Safe Streets Act, you have determined that the county, and in this case, the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, will likely only do 10 infrastructure reviews a year.
I don't think it would be more than 10 unless it were a really bad year.
Okay. And this is, by any measure, a very small percentage of the total number of crashes that involve children, in your view.
Yes, it's a small percentage of crashes involving children, and it's a very small percentage of total crashes in the county. Keeping in mind, kids wait at bus stops, school bus stops, and get hit at school bus stops. Kids walk to school, kids bike to school, they get hit while they're walking or biking to school. MCPS expects kids to walk and bike to school from far more area than the few hundred feet in front of a school.
Right. So your central complaint then about this issue is that the infrastructure review is too narrowly focused on the school zones.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a complaint. It's just more a statement of fact that the scope of the bill compared to the scope of the problem is very, very small. So part of it is actually data issues, right? Because in order for MCDOT to do the crash review, they have to be notified. This is written into the bill. They have to be notified by law enforcement. And what crashes will law enforcement notify MCDOT about, and how will they know to do it? And can MCDOT, the crash locations in crash reports are often wrong. I don't know whether anybody routinely reviews crash reports to begin with. So part of it is even a data definition problem of how are you going to say, okay, here's a police crash report and we're supposed to do an infrastructure review about it. So that's part of it. Mm-hmm. And then the other part is more, up your alley, Sunil. It's a political issue. What do we want to be focusing on? Do we want to say, okay, we want in particular the school frontage to be safe. And so, for example, we could ask MCDOT to do an infrastructure review for any crash that happens at any time if it's in front of a school on grounds that, if it wasn't during arrival or dismissal, if it wasn't a student, it could have been, right? We could, that would be a possible scope. Another possible scope would be, since NCPS has maps delineating areas for walk zones, it could be, any pedestrian hit within a school walk zone on grounds that, if we're expecting kids to walk to or from school there, then that should be safe. So there is the political question for you, what should we be focusing on?
Okay, so I just want to clarify something. School zones and walk zones are different things.
Right. School zones and walk zones are different things. School zones are established by MCDOT within the bounds of the state law. Walk zones are the areas where MCPS has determined that it is, it's within the limits of the walk distances in their policy, which is 2 miles for high school, and 1.5 miles for middle school, and 1 mile for elementary school. And it's safe for there is a safe walking route to school for the students. And under those conditions, MCPS says, we're not providing bus service for you, you're going to walk to school.
Why not do infrastructure reviews of anyone below 18 hit within the walk zone?
Because they'd have to do a lot of them. I think fundamentally that's the answer. They'd have to do a lot of infrastructure reviews.
And they don't want to do it.
It's always a question of budget resources, and then budget resources are always a question of priorities. The saying is that the budget is a moral document. If you look at all crashes that happen in school walk zones, it's about half of the crashes in the county.
Okay. So that's a very good starting point, right? So almost half of all pedestrian crashes or crashes involving pedestrians.
Well, non-motorists.
Non-motor. Okay.
Generally.
Okay. As much as half of all crashes involving walkers and bikers, so non-motorists, in the county happened in some school walk zone, not in a school designated zone, but in a school walk zone.
Right. Yes. And if you look at it in a different way, sort of a geographically simpler way, the crash is happening within just a half-mile radius around the school. It also comes out to about half.
And so they would have to do, if they did all of those, they would have to do something like 325 to 350 infrastructure reviews a year. That's a lot compared to 10.
Yes, that's a lot compared to 10.
Okay. But we don't know, but we can potentially, at least the county council can potentially reduce that number to being just children, and that would be a subset. How big a subset, we don't know, but that would be a subset of the 325, 350 number.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, they could do that. Yes.
Are there other things that you would like the bill to do that perhaps make it better?
Initially, I had envisioned just a public database of these crashes, because I don't think anybody has a good understanding of how common and frequent they are. Nobody is tracking them systematically. A lot of it is, honestly tracking through the mom network, that somebody knows somebody at some school whose kid was hit. And then somebody else knows somebody at some other school where a kid was hit. And this is not any systematic thing. And all you get is a bunch of individual reports, and you don't know what happened at the schools where the mom network didn't go. And I feel like if we're going to understand the problem and we're going to build a political consensus that it even is a problem, we need to know how big it is.
Right. So setting aside for a second that the number of infrastructure reviews envisioned within the Safe Streets Act is wholly inadequate. Just set that aside for just a second. Would the infrastructure reviews then be public for you to be able to do this, at least for the 10 cases that they will?
I believe so. I mean, I think that, even if they were not routinely posted, they would be public records and could be obtained.
Okay. What does the infrastructure review itself include? Do you know?
Well, so that is another issue, because there is now a state requirement for the state law that requires the State Highway Administration to do infrastructure reviews for pedestrians and bicyclists killed on state roads or at state-controlled intersections. And that law went into effect, I believe, October 1st, and the state started publishing their infrastructure reviews. And I am not a lawyer, but looking at what the state law requires and looking at what the State Highway Administration is publishing, I don't believe that the state infrastructure reviews even comply with the law. It's essentially a 3-page checklist to make sure that the signals were working and the lines were painted and there was a curb, and whether or not there was a guardrail, and there's not even a space on the form for whether or not there was a sidewalk. It is another issue to discuss what the infrastructure review would even entail.
In the county case, they are going to do every collision, not every fatal collision.
In the county review, it would be every collision that meets whatever scope they decide on, not just the fatal ones.
What is interesting here is the state and the county limit their exposure to infrastructure reviews in different ways. One, by limiting it to fatalities, and the second, by limiting it to schools, to a very narrow area called the school zone.
Right. Yes, that they both have limited scope. And in fact, the state infrastructure review bill initially, as introduced, had a long list of things, the infrastructure review was supposed to include. And that list disappeared by the time the bill passed.
That's very interesting. So this is Delegate Jared Solomon's bill, correct?
No, this is Delegate Polakovich-Carr's bill.
Have you talked to her about strengthening it?
Yes, I have talked to her.
Is that coming?
Well, I think that all of the state legislators are already starting to think about what bills they will introduce in the next session.
Are you hopeful that the Safe Streets Act in Montgomery County is going to pass as is?
I do expect the bill to pass in some version. I think there is, as you said, widespread support for the idea that our streets should be safer.
But there isn't consensus over how to do it.
Right. And I think to some extent, there is not even necessarily an understanding of the extent of the problem.
Miriam Schonbaum, thank you for taking the time to explain a very complicated issue.
Thank you for having me.
It doesn't matter when the lights are paper thin through the blinds of my room. Oh, there's a quiet roar from the neighbor's door. I don't hear it when I sleep. The bed is my warm, soft, unforgiving tomb where I lay my head. The night cleanses me like a lover's purity. I'll sleep like a child.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. What lessons should we draw from my conversation with road safety advocate Miriam Schonbaum of the Action Committee for Transit? First, the pursuit of incremental change, incrementalism, or gradualism is a policy choice. In the face of grave danger, increasing road deaths, outdated engineering standards, and misunderstanding of the scope of the problem, we take small steps. The Safe Street Bill is a step in the right direction, but it is imperceptible. The no turn on red changes are limited to all county road intersections in designated urban areas. How many intersections are actually covered? We don't know yet, but no matter. Putting up signs and reprogramming traffic lights is small bucks, as Miriam Schonbaum points out. Any payoff would be positive. The second part of the Safe Streets Bill concerns automated traffic enforcement. The bill asks the county executive to come up with a plan for the use of traffic cameras in the county. By all reports, the county executive and the Montgomery County Police have already been working on this for some time. The real concern here is that the county's use of cameras for traffic enforcement, and particularly to issue speeding tickets, needs a change in the state law to happen. The Montgomery County legislative delegation to Annapolis has been working on possible legislation, so perhaps the intent of the county law, the Safe Streets Act, is to signal to the state legislature that the county is ready to take a step in the right direction. A word of caution here. It's not like the county doesn't already use cameras for traffic enforcement right now. In fact, the broadest use of cameras is on the county's 1,400 school buses. These are cameras that are used to ticket drivers who cross stopped school buses. Turns out that the program is highly problematic. Not only is the vendor disreputable, but Delegate David Moon has on this podcast shared data that suggests several problems, including disproportionate and improperly issued tickets for certain locations in the down county. The biggest problem with the Safe Streets bill, however, is the provision for infrastructure review for non-motorist crashes around schools. As currently written, Miriam Schonbaum estimates that the bill would require about 10 infrastructure reviews a year in a county where about 350 non-motorist crashes happen within a half-mile radius of our public schools. Think about that. By limiting infrastructure reviews to designated school zones, and many schools have no designated school zone at all, the law limits investigation into crashes that is a central rationale of the law itself. We write the law we want. We write the law to get incremental change. It is a policy choice. Opportunity cost is a widely understood concept in economics. As the marginally incremental Safe Streets bill is pushed through in the name of comprehensive road safety, what is the opportunity cost in politics? That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from the band Finster. Kate Servino Johnson on vocals and guitar, Doogie Whitaker on guitar and vocals, Howard Rayback on the bass, and Matt Zelenz on the drums. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
You're such a sweet mystery. I dream of that smooth skin kiss dry sun. We're just dancing around in your windows, dying to lean in, but instead I should run. It's no fair, it's no fun. I know I can't have you, but just for one night so we can ignite this burning love, burning love, burning love. You're so close, I can feel you. I ache each time you push back that head. You're looking at me like you want trouble. Baby, we can't break up these pairs.